Age of Fission radio show with your host, Lonnie Clark. We stand together and accept that we now live in a world transformed by Fukushima. Monday, Wednesday, and Friday from 8 a.m. to 9 a.m. Pacific Standard Time here on UCY.TV radio. We relentlessly engage every ear that listens. We expose and confront the complete lack of accountability for the nuclear industry. Consider social engineering programs who view our bodies, minds, and souls as assets on a balance sheet. We discuss vital current issues, interview activists, and engage our audience in an effort to allow all voices to be heard. The Age of Vision radio show creates a venue that all will choose. We encourage our listeners to reclaim their power and their courage to take action and save our planet from the ravages of greed and indifference. Our actions matter. Every voice matters. We remind our listeners that happiness is resistance. Love is greater than fear. Good morning, UCY.TV radio listeners. This is Lonnie Clark with the Age of Fission radio show. Thank you for joining us. Today is May 19th, 2017. It's Friday, so now we know what day it is. And thanks for joining us. Please remember to share our station and let people know they can find us live on TuneIn Radio at UCY TV or catch us on our YouTube, UCY TV, and look for our podcast, The Age of Fission Radio Show. You know, we're trying to grow this little station that has no commercials, and this is why we get to interview awesome activists like Mimi Gurman today. Thanks, Mimi. Thank you for joining us. She's with No Nukes Northwest.
Hey, thanks. And I'm glad it's Friday.
And by the way, if any of you have some spare beans that you want to contribute, you can contribute to this station or go to nonukesnw.org and make a big fat contribution to both of us because we could both use the support.
That's right. We need a fleet of kayaks, folks.
Exactly. So there you go.
Yeah.
Well, Mimi, thanks for joining us again, and I'm grateful you were with us last week. You called in when Heidi was on, and I'm so grateful you're joining us today because I want to have you. Why don't I just let you loose because you're super active. You have been doing things with the Portland City Council to hold them accountable about their water issues, and also keeping Hanford accountable and exposing the lies of the nuclear liars and murderers. So where do you want to start? I mean, which one would you like to pick on?
Well, first of all, I'd like to, can people call in if they have questions?
Yes, and if they have questions.
Oh, good.
Yes, so the number is 718-717-8106. And that's my Skype number, 718-717-8106. So you can give us a call, and if you want to ask her a question directly, please call.
So,
and thank you for that.
Start with oh, sure. So I'll start with Hanford. Hanford's been such a travesty for decades, and there's so much at Hanford that we don't hear of. So you know it's bad when we actually hear about something. So one of the things I learned after Fukushima melted down was all of the news is in what isn't being spoken, and then it's in what is being spoken behind the scenes. So let me explain. So mostly there's no news, which means things are, like at Hanford, just radioactive as usual. Then we have a collapse happen, which is what happened, a week and a half ago at Hanford. Many of you who listen to the show are aware of it. It happened over an old train tunnel that was used to carry radioactive fuel. And the tunnel itself had to have been highly radioactive. So the way that I put my feelings, my knowledge since post-Fukushima to work with this situation was this. First of all, it must have been massive because they told us about it. Secondly, they evacuated 9,000 people. They evacuated workers from all over the Hanford Reserve. And they have never done that before. They implemented a, what is it called? It's not
Excuse me.
cover, which is what, yeah.
You're telling me they've never evacuated like that before? That was the first time they've ever done anything like that?
Yep.
See, for someone on the outside, when we hear they were evacuated, in my mind, and I'm sure like many other people, they're like, oh, thank God they evacuate. Like this is a regular thing where they evacuate them to keep them safe when things happen.
No, they've done lockdowns before where people have to stay inside. That has happened. That's happened within the last few years. That's happened when the releases at the tank farm, they've released radioactive and other toxic gases that made people brain damaged, is in effect what occurred. So there's like and I might be underestimating here because I can't remember right now. I'd have to call Tom Carpenter to find out exactly. But I think it's about 25 people who have incredible illnesses that are going to kill them sooner than they ever expected in their lifetime. And
I watched an interview with one of the victims and their wives, and how Hanford denies it. The DOE even denies it. They completely deny that it is related to it. They have to fight them tooth and nail all the way down.
Right. Well, one of the things I learned at the time that was happening, and we'll get back to the collapse and why I was saying what I was saying, which actually has all been verified. But back to the tank farms for a moment, and these gases that come off. When that started happening and we started to hear about it, again, key point, we started to hear about it. We always know that these things happened, but we weren't hearing about it. So they had to be really bad for us to hear about it. So what I would do was call up somebody who I can't say, one of my people up there, and say to her, so this can't be the first time this has happened. And she said, no, this happens a lot. It's just that it affected more people than it usually affected. And that people are starting to get, people meaning workers, are starting to get hip to the fact that they're getting incredibly sick from these fumes. But she said the lids, basically keeping the noxious fumes down, when they get opened, the process for doing the work that they do is so, it's not even about being outdated. It's so dangerous and done so incorrectly without proper equipment on the workers. These workers at the tank farms do not wear proper equipment to protect themselves from radioactive waste, the highest radioactive waste that we have on the planet in these tanks. They're not even made, they're not mandated to wear proper gear. So that's what she told me. So she said, finally, you are hearing about this, meaning the public. But this is the kind of thing that goes on and on and on at Hanford. So back to the collapse. So yeah, we hear about the collapse. So it's got to be a big deal, or they'd never tell us about it. And on top of that, they evacuated 9,000 people. Big deal.
They evacuated 9,000 people?
Yes.
See, these are the numbers that you cannot find. Where did you get that number? Like, how did we find that number?
From a worker at the waste treatment plant.
Wow. So that number is not out there anywhere.
No, the number actually was kind of around, at one point it was around 3,000. And then I heard from this person it was 9.
How many people work out there total?
I don't know. There's a lot of people there. There's a waste treatment plant, which has its own people. There's a tank farm. There's Bechtel. There's URS, which are the contractors. There's so many people. There's PureX, which is where the tunnel collapse happened.
Well, I guess how many people are adults living in Richland? That's how many people work there, probably.
Right. Exactly. exactly. That's a good point, Lonnie.
So,
So I knew anyway this was a big deal. And my first question was, what are the measurements? How much radiation got out? It's the only question that needed to be asked. And it's the only question that wasn't asked. Back to the silence. That's what I meant when they tell you something and they don't tell you something. They told us this is a big deal without using those words. In fact, what they said, how they couched the whole thing was, not only isn't this a big deal, even though we're telling you this, but there was no radioactivity released, which is an impossibility, folks. Okay? It's impossible to have a hole in a tunnel that's been there for decades covering up such high levels of radioactivity, which is why it was covered up in the first place, of cesium, of everything that comes with that, thorium, all kinds of hundreds of radionuclides. The hottest shit that we have in one bundle, but in many bundles, is hidden in that tunnel. Not hidden, but, supposedly kept safe from us in the tunnel. And then, boom, there's a hole, right? So you guys, you don't need to be a scientist to understand that if you're containing something and then all of a sudden there's a hole in it, and the thing that you're containing only has half-lives. One half-life goes to another half-life, goes to another half-life, and basically never, ever, ever for thousands of years, hundreds of thousands of years, never goes away, okay? It's not like salt, right? It's or anything that might.
But that is
time,
the very reason. That is the very reason they don't mind creating more. It's the very reason they don't test for plutonium. It's because they know we have it now forever. Like, so why not have more? What's the difference? One drop's as toxic as a million drops. Seriously,
right.
I have talked with them. This is their mentality. This is why they lie to us, Mimi. This is why I think you were completely, I wrote this down, secrecy issues. This is why we're angry. This is what's unreasonable for workers. I just read a thing. I opened this up on Hanford Challenge, and there's an art, they report on this. The workers there are being fought tooth and nail. And now the Washington State is about to put in some for some workers at Hanford. Every worker at Hanford ought to be covered, period. They ought not to be the victims of World War II. That we need to pay for them. It's unreasonable for them to ever have. If they're not aware that they're going to get sick working there, this is why they don't want to pay, because that means that they know these people, anybody that works there, pretty much you have a high chance of having pretty miserable end of life scenario. That's the reality. Your end of life scenario is pretty horrendous if you work at Hanford.
Right.
And that has a varying degree of, however you live your life, which I guess goes back to happiness is resistance. Because if you're living in Richland, you better be happy, because you're going to suffer at the end. And that some people don't mind that. But this is the unreasonable part. It's the secrecy. What isn't spoken and what is spoken behind the scenes. Because spoken behind the scenes, in my view, is treason. If you're not willing to tell the public, if you're willing to murder the public, that's treason. If we don't have a government to protect the people, what do we have it for?
Well, I'm with you, but Hanford and the nuclear mafia was created on secrecy. Their whole foundation is secrecy. Yes. And that's not hyperbole. This is what it was based on. When back in the day, when I don't know, 1930 something, when they were beginning all this stuff, no one knew what anyone was doing. That went on for decades.
Right.
You didn't know what the person was making right next to you at the next desk over. You were separated by a wall. And you had no idea, and you couldn't ask. If you asked, you'd be fired. If you asked, you'd probably go to jail.
Yeah, yes.
Because the level of secrecy was so high.
Right. I mean, this is
So
the
this
thing,
is
though.
super top secret stuff, I mean,
Yeah, but
really
you know what?
top
That's
secret.
where we go wrong. We don't need to. This is the reality. Right now, the world is being run by top secret stuff, and it's quite murderous. It really, this
Well,
is why, like, people, never mind, I get off on a tangent about this one. So let's talk about Hanford. Let's stick to this because I could get off on,
well,
I'm angry about what's going on at Hanford. We are seriously being poisoned by that place. The explosion is not, what will happen when it affects Columbia Generating Station?
well, these are two different things, really.
Yes, but they're kind of
This
combined.
collapse,
Go
the
ahead.
collapse is pretty much contained to this area, and it's a big Hanford. The Hanford Reserve is pretty big, and we're not talking about an earthquake with this, though, maybe we are, because there was an earthquake cluster for days up in Washington right before this happened, the same week. And so I'm going to recount what I just said. So because of those, I'm wondering if there were reverberations into the Hanford Reserve, which created in a faulty structural tunnel. First of all, they built the tunnel in a way that was going to fail. It was made to fail. Then you take that, a tunnel that was made to fail with how they put the beams in and how they made the height and all of this stuff. Then you put on top of that the most highly radioactive substances inside that tunnel. And it completely degrades the structure that you've created to contain that heat. So the heat all of a sudden starts to and really from the moment that it's closed up or the moment that radioactivity is in there, radioactive substance is in there, it degrades whatever's around it. So we have the timbers degraded. We have all of the structural alignment of this tunnel degraded. Then, decades later, we have the wettest winter that they've ever had. So the ground is soggy, and on top of that, we have an earthquake cluster in Bremerton, Washington. And my thoughts about this are that the reverberations from the earthquake clusters that were happening that week did reverberate the earth, did reverberate into this soggy ground on top of a structurally failed tunnel, on top of radioactive waste that was there. And there was no way, which is the same thing with anything nuclear, there was no way that this couldn't fail. And there's no way that this won't fail again. This fails every day. It's just not always at this tunnel. It's somewhere at Hanford. I went, some of you who listen to Lonnie's show know this story, but last year I went up to Hanford with my Geiger counter to check out things, which I do every few years. And I measured the radiation at the Hanford sign to just start the radiation numbers. Let's just start the sign and let's go in and see what happens. So the sign was already hot. The sign was above background in numbers. So it was hot, not super hot, but hotter than background. Then I went in, things came down a bit. Then I hit, this was about 300 yards maybe from the sign. It's Site 300. Site 300 was a remediated site, which means that the contractors were paid billions of dollars to take all of that dirt that was radioactive and move it to a building that they build or wherever the hell they take this stuff. They build things to put radioactive soil in at Hanford. But as I drove into Site 300, my Geiger counter went up. And instead of the background being 28 counts per minute or somewhere around there, it was an average of 75 to 80 counts per minute. And I was on remediated soil. So it was still super hot. And this is the problem at Hanford. It's always radioactive. No matter where you are, it's radioactive. And I can't go up there now to do any testing because I breathed in dust. I breathed
Yeah.
in. It was it wasn't a super windy day. And in fact, right after, this was so interesting, 2 months, maybe 3 months after
You
I
didn't
was
bring
up
an
there,
air
it was actually,
mask?
no. So 3 months later in November, there was a news piece. Again, remember, folks, when they tell you on the news something about Hanford, it's a big deal. That the dirt, because of the windstorms in November, maybe it was October, I can't remember, the windstorms were pushing radioactive soil from one side of the highway to the other. That's where I was. And so they verified, like I already knew this because I have a really good Geiger counter. I already knew that the dirt that I was standing on was radioactive,
Wow.
But they verified it by saying to the public, do not come here right now because we have radioactive dirt in the wind moving across the Hanford Reserve, which crosses roads and highways. So I know when I speak about Hanford that what I'm telling you is true. And I have no doubt, because I got this firsthand, and then my stuff gets backed up somehow, whether it gets backed up from a worker, in the case of the collapse, or it gets backed up by what happened up there last year with the winds, with this report from the winds. So I don't even know where to go with this, except to say that go ahead.
I have a question to ask you. Do you think this is the thing? We have just got to stop the insanity. We're not going to get rid of the nuclear waste. We need to have like this firm conversation about how the secrecy about all this has got to end. The idea that these Hanford workers, not all of them are, they can reframe this sentence to say, if you work at Hanford, you're going to have end of life issues. You may be held. This is the thing. We need to have a reality check about how these things are being talked about, because it's not going away. And all it's going to do is just cause more massive harm if the denial continues. It can be managed. People can be smart about it. We are being exposed, but there's no reason for the denial to happen, so people recklessly put themselves in harm's way. People have a right to know. And some people will, it's that one drop or a million drops idea. It doesn't matter. We're there. We are seeing the mass animal deaths. I don't know about you, but I check the mass animal deaths almost every other day, at least every other day, because this breaks my heart. The amount, I was going to make an Excel spreadsheet, right? And I got overwhelmed with grief. How many animals are dying around the planet? All many different kinds of animals we don't even hear about.
Right.
So.
Sorry, I just put my, there we go. I'm in
Okay.
my massage office. And
okay.
turn on my sorry.
She's on her way to work, folks. So thanks, Mimi, for taking time to talk to us about this while you're continuing to do. This is how activism works, isn't it? Because
until Soros actually pays us, we have jobs.
Don't we wish? I don't know.
Yeah.
That whole conversation of that's just the whole demonizing, the whole. We've got to get beyond that. The whole demonization of each other. We need to be able to really have civil discourse, and just again, we're so off track. But this is
so. Let me tell you about civil discourse for a moment, because an interesting thing happened. So there's a guy that I talked to who works up at Hanford, and I was asking him questions, and he wasn't sure what I knew about radiation. And my main question for him, of course, was, what are the numbers? And a week and a half ago, he said to me, well, he didn't answer exactly, but what he did say was, he gave me the line, which was, they said that there's no contamination, but of course some radiation got out, but it's not high. This is the line. Okay. So I said, well, have you seen the measurements? No. And this is a guy who works there, so he knows, he knows these things. He might not have seen the measurements, but he knows that you need to see the measurements, but he believes the system. So this is a week and a half ago. I told him what I thought. And then the other day, he started to put out all of this information, which said exactly what I've been saying, which is that finding out all of the structural that the structural integrity of the tunnel upon being built was abysmal, on top of the amount of radiation that was in that tunnel covered up for decades. The amount of radiation coming out had to have been very high. And he's admitting this now. Now he's not the corporation. He works for the corporation, but he's not it. He's a worker. So it was fascinating to see within days, his turnaround of understanding, well, wait, now that I know what was in there, this had to have happened. And why maybe were those readings less than, again, we don't know what the readings were, but why were those readings in his mind less than what he thought? Well, he put it together and was like, well, I guess because it's been raining and the ground is wet, meaning there's not a lot of dust. Had there been a lot of dust, all of the contaminated soil would be blowing again. But it had rained. So things were kept where they were, In the meantime, so anyway, just that in and of itself was very, it was good for me to see this guy come to his senses, because that's exactly what happened. He put the science together. Then he said to me, I asked him something else, and he said to me, I think we're going to disagree on a lot of things because I'm pro-nuclear and I'm pro-hydro. And I wrote back to him and I said, the fact that we might disagree on a lot of things is fine with me. I don't only know people who agree with me. I said, what I'm sure we can agree upon is that any levels of radiation released from, let's say, the tank farm, the tunnel, anywhere on Earth, and radioactive contamination are both a hazard and deadly. I said, I'm pretty sure we can agree on that. And he didn't come back at me to say anything negative about that. And this is where we come together.
Well, this is the reality.
We find that line.
You know what, yeah. Mimi? It's that point that I said to you. There's a lot of people that are pro-nuclear for the very reason of it's 1 drop or 1,000,000 drops just as toxic, and we have it. So, okay, we have it, so let's figure out how we're going to deal with it. There is something to be said with that attitude. I'm not pro-nuclear, but I think we need to have a pro-nuclear reality check. You know what I mean? We need to have a reality check that's a nuclear acknowledging that it's here. We're in the stew. The more I've discovered this is what Heidi said last week that really intrigued me. They're out there just playing whack-a-mole. They have so many disasters going on there. The whole thing is a mess. Yes, they do. It's not just this, like the disregard for like Donna Gilmore's coming on Monday to talk about storage tanks and what's going on with San Onofre and the things that she's been working on. And her forte was she's the one who discovered we have been, she really made a point with San Onofre and let them know they did not know. So she let the elected officials in California know through her efforts that we have 3/8-inch storage tanks in the United States. She dug into this, and they're firmly committed. But I think the reality is for that reason, but the issue is, let's have an honest conversation. If you want to work at a nuclear plant or you're going to work at Hanford, and the companies have got to be prevented from, I found it offensive. I don't know how you feel about this, but there's a legislation that said some of the Hanford workers will be guaranteed to be covered by the legislation. That was the highlight. I haven't had a chance to read it, but it angered me. I'm like, the Washington legislators, the state senators, ought to be having a proposal that says all state workers, everybody that works at Hanford gets covered. I mean, there's no harm in saying you're going to have a hard time working here. Thank you for your service.
Well, I would take that 100 steps in a different direction and say that all Native Americans who have who have suffered from nuclear, from uranium mining, from
everything,
the tailings from the ponds, open pits, to nuke plants on their land, they come first. They come before these workers, as far as I'm concerned.
Well, the workers. Well, I think everybody, they should just give a blanket to all of them, the whole area, the people that they moved out, their children, all of the stuff they've done to them. I mean, it's really, the whole thing is just an offense. It's an eyesore. It's like somebody shot a bullet hole in Mother Earth right there, for real.
Right.
And so, what are they telling us now? So let's talk about what's being talked about behind the scenes. What are they saying that? Do you know anything on that one?
I do, yeah. They had a meeting a couple days ago, maybe 3 days ago, I think. I think it was Sunday. Senator Cantwell went up, and they told Senator Cantwell that it is possible that there will be another collapse along this tunnel. They also talked to workers and told workers that they're going to be practicing this is what I started to say at the top of the show. It's not called duck and cover, okay, but it's like cover up, I think. I can't remember because I'm not looking at my computer right now. They have a term for it, and they did employ it during this latest collapse, where when you are at the reserve and something like this happens, there's this thing that goes into effect, and I think it's called cover up, which is ironic, but it might not be the true words. Okay, so don't quote me on cover up, but it's something like that. And what it is it's supposedly a safety mechanism that all workers need to know and practice. Well, it doesn't get practiced. So they're practicing that this week. There are actually photos of that came out today of what that looks like. And workers had an opportunity to ask questions. Now, this isn't public. I just know this. So the workers did ask questions. They asked questions like, how dangerous is this for us? Because they don't even know. People listening to this show right now, the workers at Hanford are so lied to, and they're so, well, to me, you can't be very intelligent if you're going to work as just like, I don't know. I got a lot of, maybe I shouldn't say that. There's a lot missing, man. There's a lot missing. Yeah, there's a lot missing if you're going to go work at the most radioactive nuclear dump. You know, I mean, like, you got to have like some form of death wish. You know, I don't know what it is that makes somebody go do that and feel like they're safe. Whatever that thing is that makes people think that they're safe, tells me that they bought the lie. Okay, so whatever that is, I won't talk about intelligence. Whatever that is, they bought the lie. And now they see when this stuff happens, oh, well, wait a minute, are we safe? And these are the questions that come out. So, the workers are asking questions right now, and they're getting the response that we all know they're getting, which is, of course, you're safe. You're going to practice, like, basically duck and cover, and we'll keep you safe. Everybody was fine. It doesn't matter that so many people were on not just lockdown, but they couldn't eat or drink because they didn't know how radioactive the water was in the air and in the food and everywhere around. So for hours, like a day, they couldn't eat or drink. That's those who were on lockdown, who weren't allowed to leave the plant.
Mm-hmm. And they did that pretty quickly within a half an hour. They shut it down. It had 8:16. They started taking. Well, it was like first thing, and boom, it was done.
So if you come out of that, you're a worker, right? And you could be in any of the unions. You could be a pipe fitter. You could be electrical, plumber. You know, there's people who work there, right? Aside from nuclear engineers. Whatever your thing is, in order for you to be there, I will call it a missing link. You got a missing link, you know, that tells you that you are okay there. And then this stuff happens, and they call you all in, and you get to ask questions. And your first question is, are we safe? Really? So I'm just saying that nuclear power creates a lot of missing links. Yeah. It
does cause schizophrenia. It does cause mental lapses. John Goffman, that was one. I mean, honestly, we're right about them lying. John Goffman, when he was studying the Japanese victims himself, he discovered that they really regularly underreport the negative effects by 90%. That was what his study, he just accidentally, it was a serendipity. He mentions it in a book that I read. I was like, what? And they immediately deny that there's no radioactivity unless they're absolutely forced to admit it. And that is exactly, they're
Right.
sticking with it. That's why I call it the 90% rule, man. They are sticking with it.
They are sticking with it. They will never. So this is what I was going to say. So one of the things that I feel was most detrimental to life on this planet from the nuclear cartel is this. There are government organizations all over the world, but primarily here, that now say things like they take the rule book, the playbook from Hanford, from how the nuclear industry works, and they apply it to themselves. So the EPA says to Flint, your water's fine. For years, your water's fine. People knew that it wasn't fine because it was all lead, but your water's fine. Keep telling the people.
It's coming out of the pipe brown.
This came from this way, though. It's not about nuclear. This way of speaking to people, this way of lying to people came from the nuclear industry. It's now being applied across the entire playing board. If the nuclear industry, if the NRC, if the DOE, because they're one of the first, right? If they can continue to say, which they've said from day one, that this is safe, this is fine, you're fine, there's no radiation, and get away with it for 100 years, why can't the EPA say the same thing? It's been working for the NRC and the DOE, right? So this is what the EPA does. And then you look at any other, but it came from this. And that's what it looks like to me, that this was the founding lie. The nuclear industry was the founders of the biggest lie that we would ever be told. And everybody else now is dipping into how to tell that lie and applying it to themselves.
Well, I think they've been doing it across the board for a super long time. This is how the AMA got started the same way. There's a lot of medical oppression because of the AMA, and we see its reflection in the ill health of the American people. Same thing with the industrialized food products that we have in our country. We have been assets on a balance sheet, and they have been lying to us systematically and suppressing science. At the People's March, I carried a sign that said, "Free science from corporate control," because we need independent science to really, they have been co-opted. Just like at Hanford, these people up there, smart brains up there, but their first question is, are we safe? Really? Have they done any of their own research? Have they really read anything other than what the company tells them? This is the issue. If they do, they probably get into trouble at work, right? So.
Mm-hmm. Let me give you an update on what's happening at Hanford right now.
Okay, great.
What I found out a couple of days ago was that back in 1991, they knew that they were going to run into troubles.
Right, I read that on my show. Right.
Right. Okay. So now there's a new report that came out today. Scientists hired by the U.S. Department of Energy, the DOE, who we were just talking about, creating the largest lie on Earth, began a series of warnings. This is scientists hired by the DOE, a series of warnings about the possible failure of the Purex tunnels nearly 4 decades ago. If the contents of the tunnel must be removed, it should be deactivated as soon as possible to ensure the tunnel is still structurally sound during the removal operation. This was in 1980. That was 36 years ago. Instead of acting, Hanford did nothing. Due to the inattention to the vulnerable storage tunnel, which is what I was just talking with you about earlier, we had this whole, let's see what this says here. There was highly contaminated radionucleotides.
That was 1980. Now that was 80.
Yes, this is.
And then
scientist who said in 1980 that they had to start dealing with the tunnel in 1980. If the breeze would have been blowing harder during this collapse, and if heavy wooden timbers supporting the tunnel would have fallen quickly instead of slowly and caused a big plume, we could have been contaminated. We could have had contamination out there. How far it would have gone, I don't know, said veteran Hanford radiation specialist Steve Ellingson. Now, again, I read that line and I say, when I read that line, we could have had contamination out there. I believe that we do have contamination out there. They're just not telling us yet. Hanford dodged a bullet. Okay, this is them telling us all as well. Okay, this is back to the lie. I'm just breaking down this article for you guys. So Hanford dodged a bullet is their way of saying you're fine. Even though higher radiation readings were detected, which, by the way, we know, meaning I and people who read EPA graphs, we do know that there was higher radiation because we have the graphs to show that. So that's a given. Due to a lack of wind, the DOE, which owns Hanford, said no contaminated particles that could have been inhaled or ingested became airborne. Lies, lies, and more lies. Okay, so really, folks, the lie is on. We feel very fortunate about that. Now, in 4 years or 5 years, people will start getting lung cancer, and people working there, and they won't be able to prove that it's from this. So this is what happens. Then a review of the DOE's own documents drafted in 1980 and 1991 show the near disaster could have been prevented if the DOE would have followed the advice of its own experts. So anyway, now they do say now, this is a week and a half later, okay, I've been saying this since day one, the only structural degradation that is occurring is due to the continued exposure of the timbers to high gamma radiation field in the tunnel. This is what I've been saying. You cannot have.
Is that the only danger?
You can only have degradation with this kind of highly radioactive material.
Mimi, I read a report last week from the lawsuit that was written to Hanford from the EPA in 1991 about those tunnels. They said that by 2001 they had to have them fixed. And then what happened after that was they got a penalty.
They didn't do it. Right.
They paid a penalty. Like, that's the ridiculous thing. Oh, just pay us some money and we'll forget about it. Forget about it. That's what the EPA did.
Mm-hmm. So these are the people. The DOE is the group, the organization, the mafia that makes $2 billion a year. $2 billion a year. Okay, and they'll always make $2 billion a year from now into eternity, whenever eternity hits. And they continue to, they'd rather pay, they use that money to pay a fine rather than do the cleanup, even though that money is allocated specifically for the cleanup of radioactive waste. So this is how our government works, folks.
That's because there's no accountability towards murder.
There's zero accountability.
I mean, as we're seeing, the Black community is seeing it. I could not believe, I was outraged. I don't mean to digress, but the other day, that cop again was let off for murdering a teen in Tulsa, completely unaccountable, and it's to me it's an indication of what's really wrong. You know, where we're at. We need ethics in this country. People have got to stop participating for their jobs. This is really ridiculous, you know. And I think we need to have a more honest conversation about the nuclear. You know, I think we need to reset the conversation. We need to be the policy entrepreneurs. We need to be the ones to frame how it's going to go. We can't keep denying and dragging people through court and making their lives are going to be miserable from the radioactivity anyways. We're in the soup. We have the money to pay for their health care. We have the money to help make their lives better. We have I think we have a responsibility because this government created this waste. Whether we did it ourselves or our forefathers did it or however we got here, man, we're here. And right now, our country has an epidemic of cancer among children. That can be prevented if we had an honest answer about chemical and nuclear pollution in this country.
Right, but then you have people like Bill McKibben who tell his minions that nuclear is pretty green, and you know, the accidents from nuclear are so rare.
Well, you know, he's one of these things. This is the cool thing about me taking this political science thing that I'm doing. I'm so glad I changed because this has actually been studied. He's considered a policy entrepreneur. That's why he gets paid. That's why he goes everywhere and everybody gives him accolades. Well, you know what? Time to change his conversation because their paradigm is false. And, you know, he can say what they want, but then it'll be like the Germans a long time ago. Like, well, we just didn't know. Really? You knew. No, this is why Angela Merkel, right after Fukushima, shut down those nuclear power plants immediately. She did not want her country to go through that again, where we had to say we didn't know in 30 to 40 years from now, because they do know. That's the reality. They do know.
Well, one of the things that anytime any of you who are listening to this hear earthquake preparedness, it's truly a joke, because Hanford, well, it's more of a joke if you live on the West Coast. Hanford has like 100 million gallons, 56 million gallons of radioactive waste, and in these tanks that are eroding, and in the groundwater, and in the river. And on Hanford's property is also this nuclear power plant called Columbia Generating Station, which is built like it's on toothpicks. And we are waiting for earthquakes. I do believe that a seismic event also contributed to this tunnel collapse. When the next seismic event occurs, if this tunnel exposes itself further, there's going to be a lot of death and a lot of contamination, a lot more than already occurred. And on top of that, if there's an earthquake, everything opens at the tank farm. Everything, all those tanks open, and the tunnel opens, and the fuel pool at the Columbia Generating Station will collapse. It is 100 feet high, and it will fall. It's built like Fukushima. So when you guys think about earthquakes, just think about Hanford.
Well, do you know do you know how much it's been? They're saying that it could sustain what size, how seismically, the Hanford complex.
I don't believe that it will sustain anything they say it will sustain. I don't believe whatever number they give us.
Right. Oh, I just saw an article up here on what years from June 19th, 2014 from Radcast. This is Mimi Gurman. I was just trying to find this. Thank you, Mimi. You've been after this a long time. Thank you. Here's the answer, providing us answers from 2014. So this is really the deal. And you're saying the same thing, that we can't really do, talk about it. It's I guess they're saying 6.0. They raised it from 4.0 to 6.0.
Well, So, and they built the nuclear power plant on an incorrect assumption that this would structurally hold up under, I think, a 7, and or something like that. I might be saying this backwards. It won't hold up for what it was built to hold up for. And that's what we have, we built more instability. Lonnie, I have to tell you, my client might be here and I might need to hop off the phone.
Okay, if that happens, if that happens, as my.
But I want to thank you in advance for putting this
information
out there.
Well, thank you. And please go to radcast.org and No Nukes Northwest. That's NW, don't spell it out. That's different people. So it's nonukesnw.org. Mimi, thank you. I hope you'll come back again, because this has been really valuable information. I had no idea there were you said 6,000 people evacuated?
9.
That's a lot of people. I had no idea that it was that many people evacuated.
Not only that, but they closed the highway. People could only go out a certain way for the people who were evacuated. They couldn't use all roads out. Wow. That's how radioactive it was. Yeah.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah.
And, and this is the other thing is this has never happened. That was the other catastrophic thing that I got from our conversation. This is really amazing that this has never happened. So, what's happening is the degradation is starting to take a toll on the place. They have never fixed it. They were told in 1991 to fix it, did not fix it, and paid a fine. They just didn't do it. I think they didn't do it because it was too radioactive. They didn't know how to do it or something. I mean, the thing should have been built in concrete. Why didn't they build it in concrete?
I don't know, but the concrete would have decayed over time too, just like Chernobyl's. The covering over Chernobyl, same thing. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, it is radioactive.
Still, it would have been better. Yeah, it needs to come
Yes.
out of the ground. It needs to come out. It needs to, I think we just need to put money into, instead of in the cleanup at Hanford, we need to put money into scientists who can create something that
Yeah.
we don't have yet.
Yes.
Do some form of alchemy to create something that can contain nuclear waste and then stop making nuclear waste.
Yes, I agree. And we need a lot of scientists. We need to put money, our government, we need to hire scientists. We need to have a whole army of people going to school and getting educated and learning and, creating solutions because we are really at a critical time. This is the thing.
Right.
We're there. It's not like World
Right.
War III isn't going to happen. It's been raging. One time I made a comment on somebody's
Hey,
radio.
Lonnie,
Go ahead.
I hate to interrupt. I have to go. My client's here.
Well, Mimi,
So,
thank you for
thank
joining
you.
us. And thank you for
Okay.
joining us. Please go have a great day and thanks a lot.
Thank you. Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Well, that was really fun. I don't know how you guys feel about it, but that was actually, I got a lot of information from Mimi Gurman just now. But we are really in a critical time. So it's important for all of us. I like having Mimi on because she tells us and shows us how we didn't get into it because she wanted to stick to Hanford, but she's very actively engaged with her city council and asserting the rights of the people in Portland, especially on the water rights. Like their rates were about to go up, and we're finding lead in all of our pipes and everything. So I do want to get back to this. It is called sheltered in place. I think that's what she meant, was called sheltered in place. When those people were told at 12, they were told at 12:08 that they were to shelter in place at noon. So it happened. They were identified at 8 o'clock. And in none of the information on this website from Hanford, and I'm looking at the Hanford website, they do not talk about the numbers of the people. It's all generalities, and there's no numbers that pop out and say how high the level of the radiation is there. Nothing like that. They show pictures, but you can't see radioactivity. So what is the current? So this is 510. Hanford Information Summary. So 510 was, and today's 519. This is the last time they updated the website. Huh. Oh, Hanford site emergency terminated on 510. So everything's back to normal, folks. Don't worry. So what did they do? The collapse of the 20-foot thing. Most Hanford workers are back to normal. So they figured they covered up the hole. Crews were moving into place to prepare a backfill in the hole of the tunnel on Tuesday night, and during work to operations and personnel, and during fill the hole through Wednesday evening, work north on Y barricade was restricted to response operations and personnel essential to the safe Hanford operations. So they only let people back in to fill in the hole, and now they're all back to work. Don't worry about it. It's just fine. Well, I don't know how you guys feel, but I honestly feel very strong about this idea that we need to have like a come to Jesus moment with ourselves and just admit, man, we are in the stew. And there's really not much we can do about it. Like, we have got to face it. And we need to demand, instead of giving money to the war machine every day, let's pour money into our students, into our country, into taking the, have scientists who aren't bought off by corporations, who are actually funded by government research, by the Department of Education, and stop co-opting it out to private corporations. And the contracts and the in fact, I think we ought to end subcontracting across the board. I think we need single payer for everything. We need to stop subcontracting in the military. We need to stop subcontracting in schools. We need to stop I'm thoroughly against President Trump's privatization plan. It has been an economic disaster across the world wherever it's been imposed. It does not function. It does not work. What it does is it guts society so that once they strip it out, any type of democracy where they strip out the basically the safety nets for the people at the bottom, and people still struggling to get into the system of sustaining yourself or profiting. actually profiting and thriving in life and contributing to society. They have safety nets for the young, the elderly, the poor, because these are all, and once you gut those out, the rich people get very rich. There's a lot of poverty. And what happens is, yeah, people get their government back and start working on this again, but it takes a super long time to catch up. And I do not believe that we ought to be encouraging our government to continue to lie to us anymore. I mean, these are my big takeaways, was these secrecy issues. What isn't spoken, what is said behind the scenes, and what they are saying. Like, what are they telling us publicly? This is why like Sean and I could talk. Sean from the SGT report, even though he and I disagree vehemently on economics probably, and even, I don't know, morals, because we're both pretty moral people, but how, what's the right way to do some things? Because of the secrecy of this government. We agree on one thing, that Hillary Clinton is one of the problems. The secret government has got to end in the United States. That's what's running the show. And it's all coming out through the DOE. We're seeing it. The DOE started this secrecy. Well, not really. I mean, they didn't really start it, but they dug in deep. And they've used defense and fear, and we need war. I seriously, vehemently disagree with that concept. And I think the CIA, frankly, is a huge part of why we have, quote, terrorists, unquote, terrorists. I mean, I just think that that's a false paradigm, and their reality is not our reality. We can rework it and decide to not participate in that conversation, because this is the issue with these batterers, is they hate it when you ignore their behavior. That's why Donald Trump spews and fits every time, because he seriously suffers from narcissistic personality disorder, and he's a batterer, and he's beaten the hell out of our country, to be honest. That's why he hired Jeff Sessions. That's why Jeff Sessions came in and said, don't worry, I'm going to get tough on them. Congress is actually fighting back to rein in the little ring of terror that Jeff Sessions wants to bring into the United States. Jeff Sessions can be vindictive and will be, for as long as they give him power. This thing with Hanford is very scary, folks, because it's not just Hanford. It's everything. And it's us. It's our children are being affected. And I'm grateful that Mimi brought it back to the Native American tribes, because they have no voice, no panel, nothing that helps them get out the fact that they were the first victims of this. They were kicked off their land. That was their land. They said, sorry, you have to go. We want the Columbia River, your sacred lands. We want your Columbia River. And look what they've done with it. The Department of Energy our American government has not held up to the standard that they pretend to stand up to. And it is time that we admit it. And you know what? Rise to the challenge and demand they end this stuff. We need to have a new conversation about the nuclear waste, the chemical waste. We need to have real conversations. People are suffering, and it is not good that the people of Hanford, the Native Americans in those lands whose children are suffering. If you guys, I urge you again to look this movie up. It's called Crying Earth, Rise Up. And it documents a family's journey through this issue. So I want to thank you for listening to us. Put your courage feet on. Take some action. Do take some action. And we're going to have on here next week Donna Gilmore and Sheila Parks, Erica Duggan, Carl Grossman, Chuck Johnson. So we have a pretty full show next week. So I really hope that we can get some information out. Encourage everyone to get actively engaged. Slacktivism is still activism. Put your courage feet on. Thanks for joining us, and please share our radio station.
skateboard?